Well, turn now to the sale of recreational marijuana with land use and development. Mr. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. President. I've talked to several of you today. I'm sorry I didn't get calls out to everybody. It was just a very long day. We've talked about recreational marijuana. I think that there's not a lot of clarity on the issue from a state level, not necessarily where council sits. And so what I had been talking to folks about was tabling this indefinitely, and I think our law director can talk a little bit more about why that is a good move moving forward and how that will affect the city for right now.
At the moment, the city has a complete ban on the sale of medical marijuana. We codified that back in, I forget when. But when at the moment, the only people who are allowed to sell recreational marijuana are those people who are already licensed to sell medical marijuana. The state has not yet even released rules or selection processes for how they're going to decide how people outside the medical marijuana sales get to sell recreational marijuana. So at this point, even though there is technically the allowable sale of recreational marijuana, it cannot happen within the city. So at this point, the current ban on the sale of medical marijuana also acts as a ban on the sale of recreational marijuana. And as I spoke with Councilmember Keener today, because we don't have any clarity from the state, it doesn't make any sense. It seemed to make more sense to just leave what we have there, which will prevent all the sale until we have a better idea from the state what they're going to do for the sale of recreational marijuana, and at that point make decisions about what council wants to do going forward.
So this wouldn't put any extra teeth to what we have to say we are completely against the sale of recreational?
Well, it doesn't do anything right now. It just keeps the status quo, which is there won't be any sale of any marijuana within the city.
Okay.
I think that this is something that I will want to bring back and want to stay on top of. And as the state releases new information, I do plan to bring something back. So I don't anticipate this is going away forever, but right now it's just double dotting T's and double dotting I's, and I think it's unnecessary to put that law on the books until it's necessary.
Any other questions? We'll adjourn the Land Use Committee. We'll move now to Employee and Community Relations with Mrs. Woods to discuss the Shade Tree Commission membership.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, you want to explain the change to the makeup of the committee that this will enact for me, please?
Certainly, I'd be happy to. And I'll probably have Brian come up and speak a little bit as well. But this is the Shade Tree and Beautification Commission is a very active commission within the city. They've got over a $200,000 budget or something, somewhere in that neighborhood. And so they're constantly going out and doing work. And we are trying to prevent volunteer burnout. And so we would like to add a couple of other people to the commission to help offload some of the work that's necessary, from the Tree City Partnership Program to, what other activities? Go ahead, Brian, if you want to just talk a little bit about.
The Tree Commission has evolved quite a bit in the last few years. So we have a very robust tree removal program. So last couple times we've had a storm, 1 or 2 trees down, not a widespread power outage. You know, the Tree City Partners is where an individual person can sign up and plant a tree at their house. That involves our volunteers making 3 trips. First, to talk to them about the type of tree, then they set a flag, then we call 811 to make sure they're not going to cut a fiber optic cable when we plant the tree, and then we go back to verify the tree was planted. Actually, it's probably more. Then we make sure they watered the tree, because their agreement is to water it. So that's 3 or 4 trips per tree, and we're putting about 100 of those trees out. Then we have our regular tree planting, where we plant the trees, and then we get a gracious grant from Ariel Foundation to water them. And so we're planting about 200 trees, and then we're creating a route where our parks folks, Randy Purcell, is managing 2 paid interns through Ariel Foundation to water about 200 trees. So each of those trees gets a personal site visit, a white flag, an oops call, and it ends up, then we're doing the tree removals. Then we've taken on the bee city people. It's be all you can be. You know, there's kind of a corporate merger, so they're at almost every downtown event. So the group has expanded quite a bit, and we always have people coming in that are excited, and we always have people that kind of burn out on their way out. So Rob looked it up. There's nothing really, it's not a statutory situation, so we're not limited to the number of people other than at the discretion of this council.
I would also add that this really does help our MS4 program.
Yep.
Because trees eat up a lot of stormwater. And so this scores us points with the EPA as well. So.
Yeah, and so with the 2 requirements, education and participation, they're kind of a little bit of our stormwater, because we're going to the schools, we're talking about trees, we're talking about stormwater, we're doing a Tree City celebration in rotation at the different schools. We've hosted the Tree City banquet. There's a lot of work, and Amber's sat there for years. Mike's kind of gotten into it a little bit. The other thing is that group's heavily involved in Foundation Park. Initially, they were not, but the land management of Foundation Park, invasive species removal, volunteer organizations, there's a little bit of a overlap between what the park board is doing and what Shade Tree is doing to try to keep that park vibrant. So the commission voted to ask this council to add 2 people, and that's why we're here.
Can I just say that I am very much in favor of this? Like all of our commissions, these are just everyday citizens who are volunteering their time and making the best decisions that they can. Dr. Brown is not a tree expert. It was actually really funny to go out with him and have him asking people, well, I don't know what kind of tree this is, but I think it's so important. I think that there's really good people on this and our other commissions, and I think that this is a valuable thing for them to expand what they can do.
Yeah, and I could add to that. They just had a big meeting last Friday out at Foundation Park with Jenny DeWinter with laying groundwork and plans for a bunch of work next year with trees, as far as replacing some trees that have died from either didn't take well, disease. And so, it's quite a few trees out there next year.
Yep.
It's a lot.
Right, and it's shade tree and beautification. Right. So we've done a whole organization of stump removal. We got their opinion on this decorative wall at Chestnut Street. We're looking at some of the other city-owned concrete walls that are ugly. There's little things that go on the side, but it's shade tree and beautification. They really are on the tree side of things, but there are some things that we neglect because we're only thinking about trees.
So these additions are full-fledged members, not like on municipal planning where you have aldermen members. These are full-fledged members.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, they would be voting members. They would have all the responsibilities.
I'm assuming you'll have to bring names back to us.
Yeah.
Okay, so unless I hear an objection, my plan is to waive the 3rd reading so he can get, okay. All right, that's all.
Okay.
Thank you.
During that, we'll move now to the Compensation Review Commission, again with Mrs. Woods.
And again, I will ask the mayor if he'll help me with this one.
Certainly, and I will defer this to our Safety Service Director.
Mr. Mayor, thank you, Council. So, given the robust conversation that we've had around compensation over the last, I don't even want to say 1 year, we've had it for several years now, we felt that it was probably time for us to establish a standing committee within the city to keep these conversations going routinely. We had the conversation about, were these wage adjustments, were these COLAs, were these, however you want to do it. There is always a need with a rapidly changing economic environment that we're living in now to be collecting data, to be having these discussions, and to the same way that we do with trees, with planning, with the BZA, with everything. It's critical that we have a board that can take any sort of compensation review into consideration, and not only the wages themselves, but any sort of structure that we would like to pursue when it comes to how we pay our employees and even look at the way that we compensate our elected officials. So instead of always farming this out to third-party vendors, we could start the conversations within, get down the road. And as you'll see, if you look at the legislation, we don't completely carve out. There's section 6 that's support and resources that the city shall provide the commission with that necessary administrative support and resources to facilitate the work if needed. But we believe that a lot of that initial work can be done. Those that study can be done and kind of guide the city in whatever policy direction it needs to be guided in. So just generally speaking, just run through it. You've got your purpose and duties there. The composition of the commission exists: the mayor, safety service director, human resources, and the auditor are ex officio. You've got 2 members appointed by the mayor at his discretion, and 2 members appointed by council at council's discretion. And then the employee and community relations chair will serve as a member of that committee. So there is an opportunity for that conversation, and so any sort of information that goes before this commission can be vetted and discussed before it comes recommended to council. And that way, like with Mrs. Wood's committee, the product that eventually comes to council will have already been the kinks will have been worked out through the commission process. And then whether the chair of that commission, whether it's Mrs. Woods or whoever in perpetuity, can bring it forth and say, we've already talked about this in this commission, we feel this way, yada yada, and that person can hopefully be the champion of whatever legislation or talk about the pros and cons of whatever piece of legislation is brought forward. So that's the idea. That's the general idea.
So for people who might be appointed to this, how often do you see the commission meeting?
So, well, and that will greatly
I
depend
saw
on.
the first ones within 30 days, but.
Right, and that will be more of a organizational meeting, and it will depend on, how often we need to meet too. We haven't determined, and that will be up to council if they want to set that. And I think, we can look in here and see if there is a reason to set an annual meeting if that's necessary.
Well, it says in there they shall meet annually. I just wanted to.
And what I'm saying on top of that, they'll meet annually, but on top of, if there's a necessary, so like the Civil Service Commission is required to meet, I think 4 times a year. Like the Records Commission is required to meet twice. I think that's arbitrary for this committee because I think you're going to see them meet more than that. But if council would like to amend that to put those in there, then we can certainly do that, and you can certainly do that. It is now your legislation.
The thing I'm not sure of is how this works with collective bargaining, because those things are done in secret behind closed doors.
Sure.
And so is this commission going to recommend something to the collective bargaining agent? How does that work?
So in the case of a CBA, this commission could definitely serve us in the sense that it would gather information, but it would not be a part of which, you're looking at several people that the human resources director and the safety service director, and especially, in conjunction with the auditor, these people are already at the table when it comes to those CBA negotiations. So the CRC in this case, that's just a cutesy little acronym for you, they would be able to provide us with information, because a lot of times when we sit down with, and Bruce, I'm sure you know this, when you sit down with, if it's FOP, IAFF, OCSEA, whoever, they're talking about their wages, they're talking about benefits that are associated in the greater spectrum. It would be very beneficial if the negotiating team on behalf of the city comes armed with data that the CRC would have already gained. Does that make sense? And I think that's the benefit that the CRC can bring. And it's not even necessarily a policy at that point. It's just you have a team of people that are working on behalf of the city to provide data that we can use in those negotiations. And it doesn't necessarily, it's data's data sometimes. Doesn't have to be anything. And then there are the policy side of things too. So,
Questions, comments?
No, I think it's a good thing to have discussion, because theoretically, if there's a group putting stuff together, it should be able to bring council more information if there's any discussion about anything with wages in the future.
It's kind of very similar to the former city finance study group that was 2017. Thank you for that, yeah.
So, just to clarify, we can determine how often this meets, even if we leave it at annually. At a later date, we can say we want it 4 times a year or quarterly or
Sure.
monthly or whatever.
They could always amend the bylaws then too.
Okay.
So,
Okay. I think I'm done. Thank you.
We're a little ahead of time there, we're behind,
Yeah,
now
we
we're
are.
ahead. Now we're gonna talk about employee and community relations with Mrs. Woods to discuss the Clemens Nelson compensation survey.
Who should I turn this over to? You?
Yep, I'll take it, and I'll ask Denise Neff and Heidi Miller to come on up, and Mrs. Neff can introduce Heidi, or as I like to call her randomly, Hillary.
We went to a conference here recently, and it was quite comical when he introduced me and said, "Hello, Hillary," and it's Heidi.
I didn't even hear it, so.
We've been laughing since, what, January? So council, I'd like to introduce you to Heidi Miller. She is I believe, partner. She is a partner here at Clemens Nelson. And so she is going to be distributing the final compensation survey that we've been working on for quite some time.
Thank you.
And she'll also be talking about the pay structure that will be introduced.
Thank you, ma'am.
Rather soon. I'll refer to Tanner on that. And then you can take it, yeah. There.
You wanted one, but. Okay, so, can everybody hear me okay? All right, so I'm going to, so typically, and I know some of you probably recall that I was here, I believe it was in 2021, delivering a similar message to what I'm going to deliver to today. But basically, when we started this for 24, we met, we discussed the typical process, which is essentially what's going to be laid out in this report that I'll walk you through. But the first step being a wage survey. So when we do a wage survey, we identify comparable jurisdictions, and we reach out to those jurisdictions, and we essentially collect wage data for positions that they have that are similar to you all. Now, what kind of went a little off course in that typical process is we had our initial meeting, we came up with our game plan, and there was a little bit of a rush on needing to get some data. So what we did is we still did that survey, but I also kind of gathered data from sources that I had already available to me, and kind of put that data together. So there might be some entities that are a little bit outside of the norm for that reason that you're going to see on page 2. But that was in an effort to get you all as much information as I could on a rather quick basis. So we really, in my opinion, it gave us plenty of data to kind of decide where we needed to go and what we needed to do, and how to move forward. So there were roughly 16 initial municipalities that we used, and then we also utilized, and if I'm not saying this correctly, I apologize, but a regionomic survey that essentially identified jurisdictions that were growing, stable, or declining. So we selected a couple of jurisdictions from that list as well and included that in here. So if you look again on page 2, that's the list of municipalities that we use to gather data from. Again, some of them would have positions compared to you all. They may not have all of the same positions, so we pulled what we could. And then a summary of that data is provided starting on page 3. And so there you'll see all of the positions listed. And if there's anything that you look at on this page that I think is most important, is simply just look at the difference columns. So where it shows the difference, that's essentially going to show you whether or not you are above or below what the market is, the market average. So as you look down there, basically if it's anything that's going to be positive, that means it's over market. If it's negative, it's below market. And if at any point you have questions about anything, feel free to ask, because I know I'll fly through this. So overall findings from the market, and really what I found, because I know there were some adjustments made mid-year. So basically I kind of reconfigured this data after those adjustments were made. And in my opinion, it really put you all in a good spot. Of course, it left some things that we still needed to tweak, still needed to adjust. But overall, I think that adjustment that was made was a solid adjustment. So really what my focus became at that point was just giving you all a structure, which is exactly what I recommended in 21, a pay structure that established minimums and maximums. And so that way it allows you to have a starting point for compensation and a top out point. So a maximum, so that way your positions don't get out of whack with the market. That really is the purpose of a max. And the one thing I always stress is that whether we like to admit it or not, all of our positions do have a value, and that maximum value truly does that maximum rate establishes that max value for a position. Another component that I just kind of briefly touch on page 5 is an internal equity analysis. So this is where we review the positions internally against compensable factors. So those compensable factors are there listed on page 5. Now, we did this thorough analysis in 21, so we didn't need to go through and do it to the extent that it was done then. But we did review each position individually, made adjustments as necessary, but for the most part, that analysis remained the same as it was in 21, the internal analysis, to be clear. So ultimately, what I've recommended, and what I kind of already touched on, is a pay scale. This pay scale is on page 6 and also shows you the positions that are assigned to each pay grade and the minimum value and maximum value for those positions. Again, these are driven based on the market and then also based on that internal equity analysis that I just talked about. There is a cost. There's always a cost, unfortunately. I'm sorry. But that I've included, it's $22,904, and what that cost reflects. So after any adjustments were made this past year, if there was still anybody or any position that fell below minimum, that is the cost to get them to at least the minimum. And that is the only adjustment that we made at this time. So I know in 21 we talked about moving to midpoint. We didn't look at that analysis. We simply wanted to focus on just getting employees onto the scale. And then the last part is just kind of just some language on kind of maintaining the plan. If you do a commission, this would be really good language for the commission to utilize as far as when to conduct surveys and kind of doing that, review of positions as they evolve and change. And so that last part covers that. So that's kind of my quick summary. So are there any questions for me?
These are based on an hourly wage and the number of hours in a year. Not 2,080.
Yep, correct.
It's 2,080?
Yes, yep, exactly.
Ma'am, are the ones in red just because they're above 10%, below 10 or whatever, above 10%?
On the survey data. So yes, so what that is I just tried to identify, it's kind of a color coding for me so that I can quickly see like these positions are the ones that are really out of whack. or that we really want to focus on and see if there's something going on with that data. So you're exactly right. It's the 10%. If it's below that, then I've just kind of flagged that, to make sure that it's covered and addressed. And sometimes, though, I think to be clear too, you might see a position that's low, but maybe we only got like 1 response back or 2 responses back. And so in that case, that data can sometimes be skewed. So I think that's, sometimes data, there's a lot more to it than just what's on the surface.
And, I mean, maybe I'm trying to get this put together.
You're fine.
Does this consider the adjustments that we just made here 2 weeks ago?
So this was, the adjustments that we made were part of some of the early preliminary information that we got from Clemens
Correct.
Nelson, and a lot of that was based off of the original MORPC information that we were able to obtain. This was more of the, after we were able to work out some of the questions on job descriptions or those pay bands, or what are we calling them now?
That's fine. That works
Yeah,
too.
pay grades, pay grades.
Pay bands, pay
Yeah.
ranges.
So we were basically finishing up the finer details, but yeah.
I guess the question I think Councilmember Severns asked was, are the salaries listed for the city employees the ones after the adjustments?
Correct.
Is there anybody's current salary isn't reflected in this?
Oh, so as she mentioned, there were some folks that did not get to that midpoint. That's what we were aiming for, and we recommended some were at the max. Very few did we bring to the max, but we tried to, in the adjustments, get everybody at least to that midpoint. And I think there's a shortfall of about, what'd she say, $22,000? So that's what, if we were to continue to adjust, that's what it would cost the city collectively.
But if we've adjusted anybody's wages, all those adjustments are reflected in here.
Yes.
That's-
Yeah, the one that says MV hourly rate, they did this about a month ago, so it reflects the changes
Okay.
in people's
That's
salary.
important.
Which is, I think, the question that Mel was asking.
Yeah, I didn't know if there had been something that I wasn't aware of in the last couple of weeks, so
No,
yes.
so, and a couple of those things too, I want to point out. So like the recreation director position, we knew coming in that was artificially low. And I think we have discussed that. And that would be part of one of those, looking on here, I've seen it before. You're going to find that's probably got a big red streak
Yes,
that's
yeah,
going
yes.
to come back in. I know the construction manager position, the internal equity is off on that one. There's a handful of others that you're going to find off that we knew were, well, the assistant fire chief was lower than, we knew that was lower going in. But we were trying, on top of getting everybody that significant adjustment, which coming back to the CRC, that's why I think it's necessary. We can't, it's always sticker shock if we wait 5 or 10 years to make these radical adjustments. I think the CRC will help with that continual data to keep pace with the economic environment. But also with this information, we were adding new positions. We were making sure that, these, as we put them back into the budget, we weren't going to the full max. So we knew that some of them were lower as we stair-stepped it back into the system. So I don't think that this is a surprise.
And I think when you take this approach, it is kind of baby steps in working towards moving in the right direction. So sometimes it's difficult to just do an all at once perfect fix for everybody or every position. So I do think you have to do it in small steps. And again, to kind of back up the commission, I think that is a good way to start doing that.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? Okay,
Oh, I'm fine, thanks.
okay. Thank you.
Perfect, thank you.
You done?
Yes.
We're now in recess until 6:30 PM when we officially begin the public hearing. We have a 5-minute break here. We're gonna call the Land Use and Development Chair, Mr. Skeeter, to have a public hearing on the zoning code update.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have a few people here to speak this morning, or I'm sorry, tonight, this evening. We have had a number of meetings on this issue already. This went through Municipal Planning Commission. I did have the composition of that commission sent out to everybody today, just so that everybody knows who is on that. There was a public hearing on June 6th. This passed unanimously. Some people on that commission are the Safety Service Director, Mr. Swallow, who is a public citizen, Ms. Ellsworth, who is a public citizen, and Mr. Hawkins, not that one, that is a citizen. We had a meeting with council on the 24th. It was a 30-minute long meeting. There were 0 questions from council, and we had enough time left over to order a pizza. On July 8th, we had another 15-minute meeting, and there were, again, no questions from council and extra time left over. I would like to have anyone who would like to speak in opposition speak first tonight. You will have 4 minutes. We won't be extending the minutes because it is kind of a short hearing. And then we will have Wendy talk for a little while. She has a PowerPoint, and then we will end with, if there is anyone who wants to talk in support, you will have time as well. So, now that we've started that, who would like to speak in opposition of the changing of, or the zoning code update? Mr. Carr?
Please state your name and address.
Name Donald Carr, 4 Upland Terrace. Thank you, Committee Chairman. Again, I stand before you. The code obviously has been in need of an update. It's fair to say that the format that you're seeing the new code in, it has a great improvement. I can only say that from a personal experience of 4 years serving on the Board of Zoning Appeals. It's a little bit easier to read, but the fact of the matter is it's 220 plus pages long. And as some people have mentioned to me, you almost have to be a lawyer, Mr. Broran, to be able to understand what the content of that is. It's not redundant, it's not confusing, but it is very cumbersome to get through. That's not a complaint, it's just a pure observation. So if you haven't heard from the public related to issues that they might see within that document, there's probably a good reason for that. Not many people will take the time to read 220 pages of information that sometimes to the average person doesn't really make a lot of sense. So if you have not heard from the public in recent weeks, in my opinion, it's probably for that reason. And the fact that they're mute and they have not responded back to you doesn't necessarily mean that the public supports everything that's in that document. I had the opportunity, I hope you received a packet that I left with Mr. Hill today to help, because I knew sending it on an email, sometimes it's easy to read, sometimes it's better to have a hard copy in front of you. I started by talking about the new PD district, Chapter 1107. It replaces the PND, Planned Neighborhood. In addition to that, which I'll tell you outright I'm offended by, it also includes now the planned commercial development. So now we have housing, planned neighborhood mixed within commercial. And I would bet that Mr. Schleybaugh up on Upper Gilchrist would not approve a CVS or a Dutchess at the entrance of his new development. But that's what this has done, and I think we all should be concerned that we are now combining commercial and residential into that new district. So I would like for you to maybe consider looking at that. There's no minimum lot size now being shown in the new district. And that should be offensive to, to all of us as well. It was mentioned that, oh, PND is always great for the city because it gives us the flexibility to do what we want to do with it. But that's not true at all. I think your best district is the one that has pure guidelines and it directs the developer in a direction as to how large the lots will be, how big the homes will be on that, and all the other ancillary issues within that. What's really offensive to most people is the fact now that as it stands, the Schleybaugh estate, Gilchrist Estates, would not be able to exist today.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Okay?
Sorry, I need to. Is there anyone else who would like to speak opposing the zoning code update? Mr. Beck?
Hi, my name's Bob Beck, 10 Woodside Drive. I just said I wasn't going to ramble because I got a sheet of paper, but there was a couple of you at the meeting, the last Municipal Planning Commission meeting, that they did approve this. And afterwards, I was talking to some of them, and they said, well, wait a minute. We don't approve anything. The council does. And then up here, I've been in meeting, the council says, oh, it's been blessed by the PND, and we're just kind of, you know, giving a little buff and a fluff in the once-over. So, again, when we're looking at this, please try to, you know, if you feel there's issues, we need to nail them down, because, again, at the last PND meeting, they said, well, when was the last time this ever done? 30 years ago. When was it ever revised? When did someone take one line item out of the zoning and say, this really is bad, we need to change it now? 30 years ago. So, you know, I believe if you don't learn from history, you repeat it. It'll be the same way with this, that if as council we go in and we say, well, it's a big document, it's a cumbersome document, we got to start somewhere, we'll fix it later, I would really believe that it isn't going to get fixed. So, thank you. So, I am here to ask you to reject the zoning code as it is currently written. I believe some sections should be totally removed and other sections modified to maintain the quality life that we have become accustomed to and that we expected when we purchased property in Mount Vernon. Traffic safety, education, and the city infrastructures will take a back seat to out-of-state developers' profits if these zoning codes are approved. To step back, there's been a lot of work put into the document. But as one would give a painter, a carpenter, or a mechanic detailed instructions before the project is started, this company was not told to write zoning codes in a way to maintain our small town atmosphere. Gambier, Granville, New Albany were not the examples followed, but large cities like Columbus, Toledo, and Dayton are used as a zoning code blueprint. Having our small town follow big city zoning codes is where this whole document got off to the wrong start. Some examples. Why is there text about little houses? There should never be the possibility of having 10 houses on 1 acre anywhere within the city limits of Mount Vernon. If a developer wants to build all single-family homes on his land, he should be allowed to, but will be denied that option if this passes. Residential property and businesses should continue to be separated. No property owner should be blindsided by a drive-through carryout being built in their housing development. But all the above are permitted to happen if this new zoning code is amended. Every person here has a specific zoning item that they believe is not acceptable as written. Please listen to our voices and make the changes that are needed. Do not accept this code as it is currently written. Thank you, Bob Beck.
Thank you. Are there others who would like to speak opposed to the zoning code update?
Hi, everybody. My name is Clyde Carl. I live at 507 East Gambier Street. I've been working off of this, which is the May 1st version of a 220-page document. I downloaded it on the 23rd at 10 o'clock, not knowing that the 22nd version, May 22nd version, is already there. I think that there has been a lot of stuff. The map isn't even out. I don't think anybody's seen the map. There are a lot of problems with the map. Now, I sent you all an email. I know you probably haven't had a chance to read it. But I want to cover a couple really quick things. First, Mount Vernon did not grow into the community that we all know and love with a zoning code. Zoning codes were an idea that came up in the 20th century, and now everybody wants to get rid of them because it's killing development in most cities. In fact, just in the past 2 weeks, I've noticed several opinion articles here. One is the New York Times, and that came out about 2 weeks ago. It said the best plan for housing is to plan less. Zoning is killing our cities. There's an obscure little thing that I just saw yesterday called a little online thing called Works in Progress. I got it because they want me to write for them, but that's sort of strange. And the name of it's The Housing Theory of Everything, and it talks about how you can't get businesses to move into your community when you have zoning codes that make housing inaccessible to young people, as in really big lots, really big houses. Okay, and then in the Wall Street Journal just the past week, we have an article, American towns are rebelling against mega mansions, and it's talking about how zoning codes are now being rewritten to create a maximum size to your house rather than the minimum sizes. All right, I just wanted to bring that up. Now, I made some comments, and I would like to have the opportunity to suggest that perhaps I could draft amendments. And the way you would draft amendments, I actually drafted a lot of legislation back in the 80s. You do a red line of an existing code, and then you submit it, and you say, this would be an amendment. I would like to do that. I don't know if that's the appropriate way, and I also don't know how to amend the map. As I noted, there's a few things on the map. Spot zoning, very bad idea. There are a couple things. My pet peeve, of course, is the Presbyterian Church, which is zoned residential, which is really ridiculous. And a couple other things. Lot size has been shrunk. That's good. I think the duplexes should be allowed anywhere in the city. We have a lot of really nice duplexes. And a lot of these old homes, most people don't know that. A lot of single-family homes, like the one I grew up in, it was a duplex till 1951, when my sister was born, and she was very special, so they kicked the people out in the back. Anyway, but many of these older homes, in fact, you'll see that they have a big side porch. Those were designed so that you could, like a mother-in-law house or something like that. Anyway, I also oppose historical zones because I think they're anti-historical. If you actually look at maps of Mount Vernon, you'll see a lot of those houses in the 19th century are all gone. They are ripped down and replaced, and so forth. And like And building height, I don't know why the building height set at 35. The house I just sold, 48 feet.
Sorry, your
and-
time is up.
And allows a third floor.
Thank you.
Okay, you already have my emails. I don't know if emails are the way to go, but that's what I chose. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Go ahead.
I would just note for council that the zoning map is part of the legislation that you've had for the last 3 meetings.
Good evening. My name's Dave McCoy. I live at 11 Woodside Drive. Been here before. Starting to get used to this format a little bit. My concern is obviously the development on Vernon View and how the zoning code applies to that. I question specifically at the, what's your group, Tanner? The municipal planning, if the zoning code would apply to that property. That was not answered. And if this becomes retroactive and applied to that property, then I've got a real problem with that. Because we're in a pretty fierce tussle about the getting moved to P&D anyway. And now I'm reading that P&D is going to become PD. Does that apply to that property?
It falls under the current rules.
So it's a P&D, it will not be a PD.
It's a PND. That's what they filed under.
Okay, so it will not become a PD.
They
You
have-
said it was changing in the zoning
Yeah.
document,
But they filed, they're under the current zoning code.
and it stays that way.
Well, I suspect that they could apply to move to the new, depending on where they are in the zoning code, and depends on what happens with the referendum, so, we'll see.
Well, like I said, that's my primary concern, because this, as mentioned, obviously none of you have this high-density housing thing going on in your next-door neighbor, but I do. So I'd ask you to very carefully look at how you review this and approve it, because it doesn't fit Mount Vernon from what I could read, and I apologize, I couldn't stay with it for 229 pages. So please look at it carefully and make sure you think it's best for Mount Vernon.
Thank you. Are there any others opposed? I'm going to give Wendy the floor. If you could just be mindful of the time so that we have some time for questions and responses at the end.
Yeah, if it would be easier, I can kind of first speak to some of
That-
the comments
Can we
rather
speak
than.
to
I will,
comments first?
without going through this, my presentation, I will say, as a little bit of background, is I am very aware of what, I was very much talking to everybody, the mayor and several people on the committee. We had online surveys. We had actual meetings in the beginning of this process to learn what the city wants. I don't work for big cities. I work with cities like Mount Vernon. So I am very much aware of like the local needs, and I wasn't looking to Toledo or Dayton or Columbus or any of that. And I am very versed, and we've had a lot of discussions about some of the trends going on, and there are communities that are getting rid of zoning. There are communities that are making 1, 2, 3 family dwellings by right across all the residential. We actually had a discussion about would that be something to consider here, and I think that at the time it was like that might be a little too far now, but maybe down the road. So we did make some adjustments to accommodate 2-family and I believe 3-family dwellings that were designed or pre-existed 1990, I think was the date we came up with. Excuse me. If you could show through utilities or something that existed, you actually now would be permitted where right now, technically today, they're non-conforming. So we did make some adjustments. And I think one of the biggest adjustments we did was we did split out the R1 to an R1A. And the main reason we did that was if you look at the map that I've included, literally over almost 1,000 lots were non-conforming because they didn't meet the 6,500 square foot lot. They were 50 by 100s. So we made a new zoning district that was reflective of the kind of historical platting of the city, that now makes those many, many hundreds, if not thousand, lots conforming. And the hope was to encourage people to invest in their property without having to go to the BZA and do all that. So, yes, it is a 200, thank you. Yes, the ordinance is 220 pages, but your current ordinance is pretty long too. Part of the changes that makes it a little bit lengthier, it's actually pretty comparable with other communities. I've worked on 600-page codes, so this is nothing. Is lots more graphics, lots more tables, but additionally, the back 40 pages are definitions. Like every land use that we talk about is permitted, every accessory use is defined. So that is a lot different than that. So there is a good portion of just trying to clear up administrative and enforcement things. So. I do want to talk about, because very clearly there's a lot of concern about the kind of combining the PND and the PCDD into what is a plan development. The intent was to provide flexibility. There is no mandate that you have to do mixed use. You can come in and do a residential only plan development. But we wanted to give developers an option to work with the city that if they wanted to come in and do a mixed use, which we are seeing redevelopment of areas similar to your main highway commercial corridor where they're incorporating townhomes behind commercial things. Right now, they would have to do 2 rezonings. This would allow them to come to the city, go through the zoning process, show you a plan that says, here are the uses we're gonna have, here are the densities we're gonna have, here's the type of housing we're gonna have. And you, as a planning commission and city council, would have the opportunity to say, great, or no, or, okay, you can have that commercial area, but restricted to certain uses. So there's still, there's flexibility on one side, but there's also the ability to control it on the other side. But allow the same procedure to go through. Any existing planned neighborhood development and existing PCDD, or ones in the process. So let me start with the existing ones. They will be technically rezoned to PD. However, the plans that were approved prior to this amendment will control, and we have language in there about pre-existing PDs. They will control. If somebody wants to come in and change what was previously approved, add density, they have to go through the whole process. So they would have to come to planning commission and council and explain what they want to change. Mostly if they're built, it's not going to be an issue. If there's one, I'm not aware of the one you specifically spoke to, but if there's one in the process, they will be reviewed under the current code. We have transitional rules in the first chapter that say anything that's in process now, a conditional use, goes under the current code unless time runs out. So if it's being reviewed under the current one, they would continue under that. Again, with the idea that eventually the plans that are approved are what's the controlling part. It was just, and we also strengthened open space requirements. We don't have minimum lot size requirements, we do have maximum densities. And the maximum densities are scaled based on the location. So densities that are, if you come in with a planned development near downtown, you get higher densities. Something closer to what you see if you had apartments above commercial here. That would be allowed only there. If you're doing something adjacent to or what was previously your general business area, if you want to come in and redevelop that, you can get a smaller density. If you're doing residential only, it's going to be 8 units per acre, that type of thing. With regards to, I heard the comment about you can't do single family only development. You actually can. If you want to come in and do single family only, the thought is you would just go under straight zoning. You would ask for R1 or R2 or whatever the density you want and go through the normal subdivision process. That's what you have those zoning districts for. We wanted to, in our discussions about the purpose of planned developments, one of the mistakes that a lot of communities have run into is that they're just being used to essentially achieve what the developer wants and, you know, the densities, whatever it may be, and they'll just do single family zoning that's not particularly creative or has anything special to it that you couldn't get through straight zoning. So the idea is if you want to go through the planned development, then you shouldn't be just doing single family. You should be having multiple housing products, again, to provide opportunities for different types of housing choice. If you want to do a straight single family only subdivision, either you go through your current zone, you get a new base zoning district, and you just do the plating process. So that is allowed, it's just not allowed through the plan development. The tiny home comment, this was one we struggled with because there are people that are seeking these. There's a lot of veteran villages out there that are looking at that as solution. There's other options of people looking for it. We also talked about different housing trends and development types that are out there that are unusual, that are coming online a lot more as more developers are coming. One of the other ideas we're seeing more and more of are these cottage courts. And they are not tiny homes, but they are smaller homes that are built around a kind of communal cottage court open space, but they're usually on a much smaller kind of development scale. So we were trying to find a balance to like what kind of process can we make sure that the public would be aware of something coming in there. So we came up with that small scale housing plan development. And that would be reviewed as a public hearing in front of Planning Commission. And they would be looking at what's the adjacent uses. So if something, we basically are encouraging where it can't be any bigger than 5 acres. It would have to, if it's closer to something like a church or a school where it's not as big a transition than if it was adjacent to single family, they can look at all those different types of thing and kind of consider those options. If it doesn't fit, you have the ability to say no, and that's the benefit of the conditional uses. That would be the only kind of approach to it, is that there was some kind of public level review. But again, we were trying to give some flexibility to consider newer housing types, again providing choice for people, because like somebody said, not everybody wants the big lots. Absolutely, that's true. Not everybody wants the big lots, and there's more and more multifamily development going on nowadays across Ohio that we're seeing of. We did add a new a new multifamily district that is a little higher density. It is not on the zoning map yet. That would be something that somebody would have to come through and ask for. I think that's, from what I'm looking at here, those were the biggest comments. We did a lot of work on, there's a lot of things where we did use the existing code and reformatted and cleaned it up. Spent a lot of time with your city engineer trying to address just things that were out of date, and with Lacey and with the mayor, just addressing many, many things that were not working for the city, and trying to make it as transparent as possible, but also make it easy for property owners to do stuff. So we've adjusted. We have now an administrative waiver process where if somebody really comes in with some kind of practical difficulty on their lot and they just want like a few inches of setback difference, but they have an unusual lot, they can actually get that administratively now if they can show a difficulty or a hardship. Whereas right now they have to pay and go in front of the Board of Zoning Appeals and then see what happens. And then we've done some other things as far as trying to build in flexibility by giving choices of how you can meet the same goal of like buffering or screening, but give you options of way to do that. And then the other thing is we did spend some time cleaning up some of the legal things, making sure the procedures functioned the way they do and you wanted them to. So there weren't major changes. Zoning amendments still go to Planning Commission first and then to the council. That's what state law says. That's what almost every community does. We cleaned up conditional uses. We did a lot of things like that, and we changed the signs a lot to address what's on the ground, but also legal issues. So there is a lot of just cleanup and reorganization in there.
Thank you. I'm going to give some time to, if anybody does want to speak in favor of the zoning code update. I have one person.
Hi, I'm Clyde Carl again.
Gentleman in the back.
Sorry.
Well,
yeah.
All right, I'm Clyde Carl again, and I want to say that the existing zoning code is a disaster, and it always has been. It was put through, it was voted down by council, and then a couple months later, after everybody forgot about it, they put it through because Dave Noble said that they already spent $50,000 on it, and they didn't want to have to, so, that's how we ended up with it. This is what the economists call.
We need to move on.
Okay, but anyway, the new code is such a dramatic improvement over the old code. There's no question that the new code is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr.
Mr. Schultz. You have 4 minutes.
Terry Schultz, Habitat for Humanity of Knox County, 13246 Worcester Road. Good evening. I'm speaking on behalf of the Board of Habitat for Humanity of Knox County in support of the zoning changes as presented, not because we believe they are perfect. And as many others have said, it would be nearly impossible to draft a perfect 229-page document. I can't draft a perfect 3-page document. But we believe they are a significant improvement over the current zoning regulations that have been in place in Mount Vernon over the last 30 years. I'd like to thank everyone that has been a part of the process. These changes and the countless hours of research and work that have gone into producing the document is a daunting and unforgiving task. You should all be commended for all of the hard work that you've done. As an organization, we will continue to push and strive for policy changes that will increase housing opportunities in the city and beyond, but this is a crucial first step in ensuring the future availability of housing for the entire community. When the previous zoning regulations were adopted in the 90s, the American dream was a house with a front yard, front porch, and a car or two. The American dream still exists today, and Habitat has played a role in that dream for over 30 homeowners here in Knox County. But that dream looks different today for many residents of Mount Vernon, and that is the reason the zoning regulations should be passed. We're battling a critical shortage of housing, over 100 new units short every year. On average, there are less than 10 affordable homes for sale in Knox County at any given time. Families that want to own their home but can't purchase a home because there are none, so they rent. Increased business and economic growth, which is exactly what everyone wants, but brings in new residents, and the lack of housing continues to drive up rental prices. Home ownership isn't the dream for everyone, but it is for many, and it provides generational wealth and stability for our community. Some of the highlights: the improved process for infill lots. Matching existing neighborhoods would allow affordable housing organizations like Habitat and others to move more easily navigate the zoning regulations without BZA approval. Allowing smaller homes to be built for 1 or 2 residents without garages to increase green space on smaller city lots. In a time when more than 2 generations are often living together, allowing ADUs, accessory dwelling units, to be built for additional living spaces for a redefined family unit while still offering privacy and personal space. Cottage courts and other tiny home communities allow individuals and families the opportunity to live near others with similar interests or life experience, share more communal space while having the opportunity to own a home of their own. These are a few examples of the inclusive zoning policies that are included in the new code that will allow us to meet the housing need that is already present in Mount Vernon and will be felt more as the community sees the growth that is anticipated. Just because these styles are permitted doesn't mean Mount Vernon will be flooded with residents building ADUs, tiny homes, and, quote, other non-traditional building styles. But it'll lead the opportunities for more residents in Mount Vernon to be homeowners. It'll lead to more employees living in the city where they work. It'll lead more opportunity for economic diversity and opportunity. It'll lead to more residents being able to live out their version of the American dream. Mount Vernon won't change because we allow someone to live in an ADU or a tiny home. Mount Vernon is the community it is because of the people here in Mount Vernon.
Thank you for coming. Sorry, that's your time. Do we have anyone else who would like to speak in support?
Hi, I'm John Yoder, 614 East Vine Street in Mount Vernon. I also have a real estate office on South Main Street. I'm a real estate agent, but I'd like to talk to you today as a constituent of yours and as a dad. So I have a 19-year-old daughter who's getting ready to start her freshman year at Capital University and going into elementary education. And I'm concerned about affordable housing for my daughter. So I really appreciate the higher density the accessory dwelling units, and just the diversity that could come with the plan development ideas. I like the mixed use, the walkable communities. All of those ideas, I think, are going to make housing more affordable and more accessible to our young people, which is a super, super important thing. You know, my son just graduated from Mount Vernon High School and would like to get in, is planning to start the electrical program with Knox Technical Center in January. And, you know, so I'm looking at electrician and teacher, you know, they might not make a ton of money, but they still would like to be able to own homes someday. So I also, you know, I think that the infill lots, being able to put back what was already there when there's a fire or something like that, like let's say it was a duplex or a triplex, as long as it was there before 1990, being able to bring that back in, I think is a great way to kind of streamline things without so much stuff going in front of the BZA all the time. So example project that Kevin Miller did on Oak Street and Rogers, you know, we had to go in front of BZA just to be able to rebuild a house that burned down there. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Did I see another hand for someone? Oh, Poland?
Blanchard.
Sibley Poland, 307 North Gay Street, here in Mount Vernon. I just want to let the council know that I'm really excited about the zoning changes as they pertain to accessory dwellings. As most of you know, my sort of bailiwick are the old historical homes in town, of which I've renovated many. I've worked with buyers in the area, as I am a real estate agent, that have had to choose a house perhaps in Apple Valley or something when they're looking for a home that would accommodate a blended family, like a mother-in-law suite or something like that, because they can't find something like that in town when they'd rather be in town. But of course, we know the newer homes in Apple Valley are still in that affordable range where they offer that walkout basement, where they can blend a couple of families together. And I think opening that up just opens our world up here to help keep the historical homes maintained and sold. Some people shy away from them because of their utility bills, but if they could blend that family together, that cuts their cost, and I think it makes those homes a lot more marketable. Terry took a lot of the words right out of my mouth, so I thought everything he said was just on point, and I agreed with everything he had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Was there one more? I'm sorry.
Good evening. My name is Chuck Rogers, 15639 Mackenzie Road, but I also have a lot of rentals in Mount Vernon. I want to say, obviously, nothing is perfect. It never will be. But the improvements that we've done on this has been greatly needed. I have several properties in town that are 600, 700 square feet that I mostly rent to 55 and over. And those people want to stay in homes. This is a way with the ADUs and the smaller units and the generational housing to keep those people out of nursing homes and keep them where they should be, where younger generations like us are able to take care of our parents. I have 3 projects in the pipeline that if this goes through, I'm going to be able to build an accessory dwelling apartment and smaller units that are 600, 700 square feet. Because honestly, for 2 older adults, that's all they need. That's all they want. They don't want a yard to mow. They don't want all the upkeep that comes with it. But they want the accessibility to still be able to come downtown, and they want to be able to enjoy the Front Porch Music Festival and the other things that we put on without being stuck on the outskirts of town or even as far as going out onto Yager Road. So I think the ADUs and these different and allowing these other infill projects are really going to help bring in people in town. And I think with the younger generation, some of them don't want to be homeowners. They don't look at it like we did. They look at it as, I want to rent, I want to be able to do what I want, and have that freedom. And having those infill projects will accomplish that, will help us bring those things downtown. If you look at our neighborhoods, I grew up on Burgess Street and Division Street. We used to have a mom and pop grocery store down where there's a Habitat house now, and there used to be like that all over the city. There were those little bodegas where people could go. They had an apartment over the top. And now when we did in the 90s, we scrapped all that. And we've changed the way we've gotten rid of the community in one aspect. By doing that, we've also created more of these food deserts now that people can't. You have people that rely on Dollar General as their basic places to get their groceries because of the way that the town is set up. So I think with some of these projects that we're working on, that's going to help us to bring this community back to what it is the community that we love. And the reason, honestly, why I moved back to Mount Vernon is because I wanted to see that grow in the right direction. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak? All right, then I will open it up to council. Oh, okay, sure. Go first.
I think if administration or a consultant could answer, it was a good question. I think Mr. Beck said, if you vote it in, then it doesn't get fixed, and that's a fair question. Several people have said, well, maybe it's not perfect. Okay, so if we discover this year or next year that something's not perfect, what's the process for fixing it, for getting it changed? It was a fair question, and I think it'd be good to answer that.
Can I jump in there first?
Yes, absolutely.
First of all, Mr. Beck is incorrect that there have been no changes within the zoning code since 1990. There was a somewhat small revision in about 1996. There was another somewhat small revision in 2002. And then in 2018, we rewrote the entire section on signs, so that there have been incremental changes as we found that things weren't working. So there are, in fact, ways to change that, and I'll let Wendy talk about that.
Well, and on top of that, I wish I could write a perfect code because I would charge a lot more. But I do. I mean, I've been doing this for 28 years, so I have experience now for some of my codes being in place for nearly 28 years. What most communities do and what we caution, I've seen every consultant I've ever worked with caution is we tell you to kind of keep an eye on things, over the next year or two, because that's when, things like, did this permitting process work? Did the PD process, could we have done something different? You start kind of just writing those little notes down, and typically 1 year out, 18 months out is that we will see kind of an adjustment. Not a huge change, just the tweaks to fix things that maybe didn't work as well as we thought they would. Sometimes, like I said, we had a discussion about should we be more lenient on 2 families across the city. You start seeing how it works. Maybe it is going to be okay, and you can start going, the other way and loosening things up. So the same process you have to go through the same process. You go through a planning commission, they come to you. So any amendment, any substantial amendment, or when I say substantial, anything other than like a little typo error, if there's any substance, they have to go through the same process as this.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir.
So I'm all thrown off now because I was going to start at Mr. Severance, but does anybody else have any
my
comments? It's okay.
I was very excited.
We're all just very tired.
I have nothing.
Ruckman? Ms. Woods? Bruce?
Sure.
I know you've got something to say.
I always do. I guess to start off with, Mr. Yoder's probably talking about the house of the lot that I've talked here at council from this seat before about how I wanted to buy a lot to build, but because of the complications and the unknown risk of having to go through BZA and get approval and all that, I didn't. That's where one of the current city employees lives, a beautiful home. And then that's where I came back and asked the engineering department is if my house burned down, which is 920 square foot, could I rebuild it? And I was told no, unless I kept the foundation and asked BZA for a remodel. And that is absolutely ridiculous. That's what got me involved in being interested in coming on city council, to see change. Because if somebody's house burns down, I think it's irresponsible for a city to not let somebody rebuild their home. Absolutely. But the other part of it is it cuts back on government red tape with BZA. And anytime we can cut out some sort of government regulation on something, that's a positive. I think we can all agree on that one. Maybe not on everything, but on that I think we can. And then the other thing is things have changed. I read a lot of stuff. You know, my kids get on me for reading a lot of just junk, but it's not. I sit back and read and watch YouTube about this issue. Because I sent something to all council members, I think, over the last week of a video I just happened to run across. And I just saw a thing today about Jackson Hole, Wyoming, was one of the places that's talking about cutting back on house sizes, I think. And I've said it here, is if you're a policeman or a fireman, or you work in one of our factories in town, you should be able to buy a house. Everybody starts somewhere. When I started and I went to college, I lived with a roommate that I met at the rental agent with a 1-bedroom, 1-bath, kitchen, efficiency. I went to college. When me and my wife got married, we rented for a year in Columbus. Then we bought a house in Columbus. Then we moved to Knox County. And we lived on a larger home with, a 3,000 square foot home with 5 acres out of town. Started thinking about retirement. Well, a lot of people don't want to own a 3,000 square foot house in retirement. I didn't, so we thought, no, what we did, we sold our house. Unfortunately, during the Great Recession, so we didn't do so well on it, like you could now. But then we moved into town in a 920 square foot house. Because I think, well, if I make it to 80, I want to live in a nice, comfortable place I can maybe take care of or at least get out the door in. So there's a natural progression through life with many people, probably most people. And I think we owe it to them to allow those opportunities. But I'm a big one on, if you live a policeman or a fireman, or a city worker, or somebody that works in our factories, they need to be able to have a place to live. And if they want to buy a 500 square foot house or apartment and live in it, or efficiency, if they want to live in a 2,000, 3,000 square foot home, everybody's got to start somewhere. But then as far as goes with the public notice, there's been a lot of time for the public and people to have input into this entire process. I mean, just this year alone, I think from notes here is back in like this year, 5/2, 5/9, there was public meeting. There was public hearing in Mount Vernon planning, I think in June. And then there were, I think, minutes of 6/6 you can look at, and then also on 6/13. And then that's not counting the time here at council. So there has been ample time. And before I ran for council this term, when I ran as a write-in a year and a half ago, the city was looking at changing zoning then. So I guess, so I did have something to say. I think there's been a lot of public input opportunity throughout this entire process. You can't write a perfect thing. But this, what I've read, and I've read it, and it took a long time to read, forever, it starts us down that road of giving people opportunities to have a home and live in Mount Vernon, which is what we want. And I grew up in Cincinnati, and we scrounged pop bottles to go buy candy and bubble gum at those local markets in town. And that is what builds your community, just like walkable schools. So that's all. Sorry.
You're fine. I want to thank everybody who came out today and spoke. I have read all of the emails that came. I know that I talked with council about emails that came in. So we do read those. We do appreciate your input. We are way over time, but I just want to say thank you for coming out, and we do hear when the public comes out. That's all, Mr. President.
We're now going to adjourn the public hearing. We're now in recess until 7:30 p.m. We begin the legislative portion of our meeting. 7:30 PM. We're going to call the legislative portion of the July 22nd, 2024 meeting of City Council to order. Mr. Hill, please call the roll.
Mrs. Woods.
Here.
Mr. Ruckman.
Yes.
Ms. Keener.
Here.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, here.
Mrs. Seabolt.
Here.
Mr. Severns.
Here.
Mr. Mahan.
Here. We are in session. The invocation this evening will be given by Tim Oberly from Covenant Church. Please rise for the invocation. Remain standing for the pledge.
Lord, we just thank you for this night to gather here together. And God, we thank you that you're able to do exceedingly and abundantly above anything that we ask or think, according to your word in Ephesians chapter 3 and verse 20. And God, we ask right now, Lord, that you would just grant unto this city council, Lord, the wisdom and the revelation and the knowledge, Lord, that they need, Lord, to do what they do. Lord, we thank you, Father, that you have put this group together for such a time as this, Lord God, to lead and to direct our community. And God, as they do that, I pray that you would give them clarity of mind tonight, not only for tonight, but the future, and also, Father, that you would continue to bring unity amongst this group and unity amongst the department leaders and, Father, their staff as well. And God, I just thank you for the beauty that you've created, Lord, here in Mount Vernon. Even as I've walked in many other places and drove through many other towns, I think, praise the Lord, that you've done what you've done here, Lord. And God, we pray that you continue to lead, guide, and direct us. We pray that you would continue, Lord God, to be with us as we embark on this journey, Lord, during difficult times. And God, just keep us safe, protect us. We ask for your provision financially and in all areas. In Jesus' name, and everyone who believed it said, amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Council, in your packets are the minutes from both the July 8th and the July 15th meeting. Are there any additions or corrections? Not, I'd ask for approval for both of those meetings.
So move.
Second.
They vote a second, they be approved. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, nay. They are approved. Mr. Hill, I see no petitions or communications. Council, in your packets are the committee reports from 4 committee meetings. I see no liquor control licenses or proclamations. We do have one person speaking on matters of city concern, and that's our quarterly update from our Ducks Public Health Commissioner, Zach Green.
Good evening. Thanks, President, Council. Good to see everybody. Happy Fair Week. It's not raining, so I'm not real sure to think about that. Should be raining right now. It's always raining during Fair Week.
Yeah, we're in a partial drought. I figured Fairway could take care of that.
Okay. As you look over your quarterly stats, if you have any questions at the end, feel free as always. In reference to Lyme disease, we are on target for the same amount of cases as we were last year. Matter of fact, we were at 53, as you can see. This year, we're currently at 58, year-to-date through June. So we'll continue to monitor those cases. But I will tell you, the efforts and awareness and prevention is becoming more and more evident, not just with our providers, but just community members that are coming in and saying, hey, I found this tick on me, right? We had 3 today alone. And it just the relief after where we look at it, yeah, confirm it's a dog tick, anything other than black-legged. And if it is black-legged, we can give them instructions based off of potentially, was it attached, how long potentially did it feed for, et cetera. So again, I think it's just continuing bringing that awareness into our community is where we're going to gain the most ground in regards to prevention efforts. For downtown development, we received our first initial draft from Sol Harris Day of our downtown master plan. That is currently under leadership review. We do have some corrections that we would like to provide to Sol Harris Day, and then we'll provide it to our Board of Health for further direction. I did send a message over to the Shade, wow, it's been a long day, Shade Tree Commission, in efforts just to make sure that they're aware that these processes are ongoing. Lacey Blankenhorn's been awesome with zoning as we're kind of looking for some additional space with women, infant, and children, along with expanding our behavioral health. So I just wanted to pass that along. In addition, we are currently conducting our 5-year strategic plan. So tomorrow will be our number 2 session, and we'll have another session in August. So I look to be able to share those core components with you all as we navigate into the next structure of what our vision looks like outside of what hopefully a pandemic put in the way of the last strategic plan. We have next month reaccreditation efforts from FAB, Public Health Accreditation Board. In addition, September we will have our federal partners on site in September for an on-site visit, which is part of our 3-year review of our federally qualified health center. Our community health assessment, our draft should be completed this week, so I look forward to reviewing that with community partners. We did, as of last Friday, secure 1,213 community surveys. Our threshold was 400, so obviously we surpassed that with great measure. And lastly, if anybody knows a dentist that is interested in working in public health, our longtime dentist will be retiring this November, so we are actively recruiting an individual that would like to fill those shoes. And if they just got out of school, we have awesome loan repayments through the federal government through our health center. So it's an outstanding opportunity for individuals that are looking to end their career or potentially even start. So I extend that to anybody that potentially knows someone locally. What questions do you guys have for me?
I have a concern. It's on Lyme disease.
Yeah.
And my wife wanted to be tested for it, and to a doctor in town and one out of town, kind of poo-pooed it. And finally she went to the emergency room, and they didn't think she had Lyme disease, but they gave her all these batteries of tests, and Lyme was one of them. If she called to see the results, they said, "Oh, you're fine. What about Lyme?" "Oh, wait a minute, you do have Lyme disease." So she had to go through a whole battery of and I know 2 other people who she's okay. She seems to be
Sure.
she caught it early enough that the 1 month was there.
Sure.
I know 2 other people who have it, who aren't in quite as good a shape as she is. But I wish the medical community would take it more seriously and make sure there's more testing. So if they go to the health department, can they be tested for that?
They can.
Okay, well, maybe she should have gone there first.
We can't be one thing and be it all, right?
I
To your
know.
point, it's got
People
to.
need to take that seriously because
No, I couldn't agree
that's
more.
a very serious disease.
Yes.
And one person is in not good shape because of Lyme disease, and so it's very serious. We need to take it seriously, and I'm concerned about it.
No, I share your same concern, and ongoing provider education is necessary. You know, you look at long-term providers, that's not something that's on the forefront, right? That's not something that was an issue 10, 20 years ago. So continuing to educate and be able to do the Traeger's test and do the blood draw is imperative, and we need to get better at that.
Well, maybe people should be aware of the fact that's one place they can go. They don't have to go through a bunch of hoops to have it
That's right.
tested.
That's correct.
Appreciate that.
You're very welcome.
Anything else? That was my soapbox.
Yeah. Again, I appreciate y'all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Zach. Thanks. Now we'll go to the legislative portion of the meeting, and council, you received the packet in advance. Are there any additions or corrections? If not, I'll assume it's approved by consensus. And we have no resolutions tonight for third reading. We have none for second reading. We have a few for first reading. The first one is Resolution 2024-68. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2024-68, a resolution confirming the mayor's appointment of Samantha Ramser as a regular member to the Zoning Board of Appeals and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Woods.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and take Resolution 2024-68 to its third and final reading.
Second.
And moved and second for suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mrs. Woods.
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman.
Yes.
Ms. Keener.
Yes.
Mr. Miller.
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval.
Yes.
Mr. Severns.
Yes.
Mr. Mahan.
Yes.
The roll is suspended. Mrs. Woods.
Move to adopt Resolution 2024-68.
Second.
And moved and second for the adoption of this resolution. Any discussion? Mrs. Woods.
Mr. Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair and Council. Samantha Ramser is a local resident here in town. She lives in the city limits. She is an accountant.
She's becoming quite active in the community. She's been serving on our local Board of Tax Review as well as the Civil Service Commission. She did tender her resignation from the Civil Service Commission. She wanted to join the BZA in the wake of Tanya Boucher's announcement of her just quitting, not being able to do that. And so, yes, she's anxious to get involved, and on your approval, we will begin her onboarding process.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted. Next resolution is Resolution 2024-69. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2024-69, a resolution authorizing and directing the Safety Service Director of the City of Mount Vernon, Ohio, to enter into contract with Civil and Environmental Consultants, Inc. for design of a West End sanitary sewer replacement project and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Ruckman.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to give this a first reading. I know I had talked to several council members about suspending the rule and actually taking it all the way to the third and final reading, but our engineer, Mr. Ball, had requested that I just give it a first reading, and I would like a 10-minute committee meeting at the next meeting so that he can give a presentation. He said it was either that or I had to get the whiteboard and markers out and do the presentation myself, and I don't know that I was paying attention that well, but that's all. Thank you.
I'm glad that's not happening. This resolution receives its first reading. Next resolution is resolution number 2024-70. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2024-70, a resolution authorizing the Safety Service Director of the City of Mount Vernon to grant supplemental easements to Ohio Power Company, DBA American Electric Power, and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to suspend the rule requiring 3 separate readings and take Resolution 2024-70 to its third and final reading.
Second?
Been moved and seconded for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The rule is suspended. Mrs. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt Resolution 2024-70.
Second?
Been moved and seconded for the adoption of this resolution. Any discussion? Mrs. Keener.
Thank you, Mr. President. We talked about this a little bit earlier. Mr. Bourne, would you just give us a review?
American Electric Power is upgrading one of its service lines, and under the FERC, which is the Federal Energy something or other, they are required to expand the easement from 50 feet to 60 feet. This goes and does that. It shifts the easements around. The easements we're granting today are only for property owned by the city. This doesn't have anything to do with anyone's personal or private property. This is only city-owned property.
We discussed that a little bit at committee meeting. Any other discussion? Mr. Hill.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted. Next resolution is resolution number 2024-71. Mr. Hill.
Resolution number 2024-71, a resolution confirming the mayor's appointment of Hannah Ford to the Civil Service Commission, fulfilling Samantha Ramser's unexpired 6-year term and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Woods.
Thank you, sir. I move to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and take Resolution 2024-71 to its third and final reading.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The rule is suspended. Mrs. Woods.
Thank you. Move to adopt Resolution 2024-71.
Second.
Been moved and seconded for the adoption of this resolution. Any discussion? Mrs. Woods.
Mayor.
Madam Chair and Council, thank you once again. Yes, as you see, this is a position that's been vacated by Samantha Ramser, who's now you have approved to go to BZA. Hannah Ford, born and raised in Mount Vernon, went to Ohio State for undergraduate and She has a master's degree from Franklin University in HR. She works in HR since 2016 at Knox Community Hospital. And so she's an employment specialist there since 2019, and we think makes her an excellent candidate to serve on the Civil Service Commission.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted. Now we move on to ordinances. We have two ordinances for first reading. Two ordinances for first reading, and the first one is ordinance number 2024-31. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2024-31, an ordinance to prohibit the sale of recreational marijuana in any zoning district in the city of Mount Vernon, Ohio, and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Keener?
I'm going to postpone this ordinance indefinitely. Mr. Braun, could we just keep an eye on this as
Yes.
clarity comes from the state?
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't want council to be caught unaware.
Then move, we need a second.
Second?
Then move and second that this ordinance be postponed indefinitely. Any discussion? Mrs. Keener?
No more discussion.
Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
This ordinance is postponed indefinitely. Now I move to ordinance number 2024-32. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2024-32, an ordinance to replace Part 11 of the codified ordinances of the city of Mount Vernon regarding the city zoning code and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Keener?
Thank you, Mr. President. I move to adopt ordinance 2024-32.
Second?
Then move and second for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mrs. Keener?
We've had a lot of meetings on this. I outlined the timeline that we have gone through. I think the first public meeting for this was in '23 in the early spring. I know I was at that. And this has been reviewed by a municipal planning commission that does have 3 citizens on it. I think that's important to note, and that it was passed unanimously through municipal planning. I think we've all talked about parts that we like and maybe parts that we don't. I approach this as someone like Mr. Yoder who has children who are going to be looking for a place to live soon, and I'd really like them to have somewhere to live, even if that is an accessory dwelling at some point. And I approach it also with the P&D, switching to PD as a historian. There have been mixed-use properties since Shakespeare's time, with families living on the 2nd and 3rd floor and businesses in the 1st floor. I think that that is a historical significance, and it's also important to note that R1s didn't really come about until post-World War II, when we dismantled not just communities, but we also put people into single-family residences where grandma doesn't have a house anymore. And I think that that is important because we are moving back to multi-generational homes in this economy, as we say. And for me, that's really important. I want to have somewhere for my mother to come and move to whenever she can't get around as well, which is coming soon. Sorry, Mom. But I think that those things are really important, and I think that people will be able to focus more on their family and their communities due to some of the changes that are happening in this zoning.
Can I make a comment? Going into this, I probably know I'm going to be the only no vote, and it's not because I think this is bad at all. I'm not convinced it was relayed to the public in a proper manner. I've read this. I can sit up here and say I read this twice. First got my hands on it, I think, in the end of May is when we had access to it. I feel like I studied for a year-long college exam in 6 weeks and don't even understand what I read, let alone could take a test on it. Having said that, I've had multiple emails and multiple calls from people, and I have to constantly say I don't know. And the questions that I did ask, I felt like I got answers, but they weren't real clear answers. And I just feel like some of my constituents are sitting in the same place. I don't think this is all bad at all. I just think there's some unanswered questions, came across a second one today that I asked you about, and there's just some things about this that I think could have been communicated a whole lot better, whether that was, we've had this company working on this for a long time, whether that was community meetings all along to explain what was happening. I don't know what would have been best, but I sit here tonight not completely understanding what it is that we're voting on to my satisfaction to put a yes vote. And that's not to be portrayed as I don't think we needed to replace our current zoning. I don't understand enough about it, and I have too many unanswered questions. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
No.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
No.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
By a vote of 7 to 2, this ordinance is adopted.
5 to 2.
5 to 2, I'm sorry. I wrote it down as 5. Now move to ordinances for second reading. First ordinance and second reading is ordinance number 2024-33. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2024-33, an ordinance to amend section 141.01 of the codified ordinances of the City of Mount Vernon regarding composition of the Shade Tree Commission and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Woods?
Thank you, sir. I move to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and take ordinance 2024-33 to its third and final reading.
Second.
Then moved and second for the suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The rule is suspended. Mrs. Woods?
Move to adopt ordinance 2024-33.
Second.
Then moved and second for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mrs. Woods?
Well, we talked about this in committee meeting. We are adding members to a very overworked Shade Tree Commission. So unless anybody has any further questions, I think we can vote.
Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted. Next ordinance is ordinance number 2024-34. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2024-34, an ordinance establishing a compensation review commission for the City of Mount Vernon.
Mrs. Woods?
Thank you, sir. I move to suspend the rules requiring 3 separate readings and take ordinance 2024-34 to its third and final reading.
Second.
Then moved and second for suspension of the rules. Any discussion on the suspension? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Wood?
Yes.
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The rule is suspended. Mrs. Woods?
Move to adopt ordinance 2024-34.
Second.
Then moved and second for the adoption of this ordinance. Any discussion? Mrs. Woods?
I will just make one comment. I think within 30 days of the passage of this, we have to have 2 council-appointed members. So anybody out there listening or in audience that might want to step up and volunteer for that, let me know. That's all.
Any other discussion? Mr. Hill?
Mrs. Woods?
Yes.
Mr. Ruckman?
Yes.
Ms. Keener?
Yes.
Mr. Miller?
Yes.
Mrs. Seaval?
Yes.
Mr. Severns?
Yes.
Mr. Mahan?
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted. The final ordinance of this evening is ordinance number 2024-35. Mr. Hill?
Ordinance number 2024-35, an ordinance to create a credit card use policy for the City of Mount Vernon and declaring an emergency.
Mrs. Seaval?
Thank you. I'm going to give this its first reading and would like a 15-minute meeting. Thank you.
That ordinance receives its first reading. That concludes the legislative portion of the meeting. We now move to remarks from administration. Mayor Starr.
Thank you, Mr. President and Council. Council, the only thing that I wanted to just reiterate here in the public meeting is more for the public than it is for council, but the steering committee for the Knox County, Together Knox is the name of the group that's working on the comprehensive plan for Knox County. This is, again, a county-wide initiative to make sure that we look at different issues as it relates to our overall future development. So you will have opportunities to be able to take an online survey, and that's togetherknox.org. You can go online and provide input in terms of what are our treasures, what are the outcomes that you would like to see, and you can also make notes on a map that would be a strength or a weakness. So anyway, now's the time. We want to have all of the surveys done and the meetings with different focus groups done by August 23rd, and we are aiming to beat the CHA turnout. So anyway, that's the scoop on that. So please share that link liberally with all of your associates so we can start weighing in, and you may be asked to, members of the community may be asked to serve on one of the focus groups as well. So that is all, sir. What's that? Togetherknox.org.
Mr. Saggers.
Thank you, Mr. President. This week, my staff and I, AKA Marine, and I will be working on scheduling a citywide shred day. So similarly to the cleanup day, we'll be organizing a shred day. So if you've got documents that you need to have shredded, go ahead and start packing those up, and we'll be announcing that. Hopefully we'll get that scheduled around the end of August or early September. And then after the fair dies down and I feel that it is safe to contact the fair board, we will reach out and schedule the fall cleanup day as we had already discussed. So that will be held back out at the fairgrounds, basically the same way that we did that back in whenever we did that. It's been a long, what a year this week has been, right? All right, that's all, Mr. President.
Mr. Scott.
Nothing further, Mr. President.
Mr. Stoller.
Nothing tonight, Mr. President.
Mr. Braun.
I want to especially thank Wendy, who has provided us invaluable assistance over the last 2 years as we have wrangled the zoning code into its new shape. I also want to thank council for their deliberations and questions. Thank you.
Mr. Ruckman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to thank everybody for being here this evening, and also want to take the opportunity to invite everybody out to the county fair. So please come out and check it out. You can come visit us at the end of the Merchants Building. We're hanging out there. Or I would be amiss if I didn't plug the Junior Fair Livestock Auction on Thursday. So if you'd like to come out and support some of the youth of Knox County, they've been working on their market projects over the course of the past couple of months. I would highly encourage you to do that and support the next generation of Knox County. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mrs. Woods.
Nothing this evening, thank you.
Mr. Miller.
Nothing, thank you, sir.
Mrs. Sebo.
Well, it looks like you're going to have great weather this year for the fair, so this is something to put in the record. So I guess we all need to go to the fair then. Without rain, we don't know what that's like. So I hope everybody gets time to go. That's all. Have a great time.
Mrs. Skinner.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out. I would like to tell everyone, though, that it is supposed to rain on Wednesday at the fair.
I just said no rain.
It can't be the fair if we don't have some rain, so you have to have it.
You have to be positive.
And we're not going to get back together before August's first Friday. It is the Dog Days of Summer first Friday down here on Main Street. I would encourage everybody to get out to that. That is August 7th, if you can believe that. Come out, it's a great time, but first go to the fair. That's all. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Severance.
I would just kind of second your comments on Lyme disease. My wife also contracted that a couple months or so ago, and thankfully she caught it very early. And so you have to take it serious. It's not anything to blow off. If you think you've been bitten by a tick, you need to get it checked out. So
I was bitten by a tick last year. And I had a little thing. So the doctor just gave me the antibiotic. He didn't check it. He just gave me the antibiotics. They need to check that. We need to know. We need to have a record of how many Lyme diseases we have in this county. Mr. Mahan.
Nothing this evening, sir.
That concludes our comments. Again, the fair is alive and well. It's out there today looking at broilers. I learned more about broilers this year with my grandson than I ever wanted to know. They all look the same to me, but somebody can tell the difference. So let's go to the fair. Thank you for the media for being here. That being said, I call for adjournment.
So move.
Second.
Been moved and second. We adjourn. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed nay. We are adjourned.